Hi, I'm Dave Stotts from Thru History. Happy Veterans Day. In 1918, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice was declared between Germany and the Allied forces, which effectively ended World War I. The following year, many countries celebrated November 11th as Armistice Day throughout the world. In the United States, President Woodrow Wilson declared November 11th, 1919, as the first national commemoration of Armistice Day. There were parades, picnics, and public speeches, as well as a moment of prayer in schools and businesses at 11 in the morning. In 1945, a World War II veteran from Birmingham, Alabama, had the idea to expand Armistice Day to celebrate all military veterans. Raymond Weeks led a delegation to Washington, D.C., urging then General Dwight Eisenhower to create a national holiday that honored all veterans. In 1954, President Eisenhower signed legislation formally establishing November 11th as Veterans Day in America. Veterans Day is now a national holiday, celebrating all the men and women who have served our great country in the U.S. military. But what is the military? Well, in simple terms, the U.S. Armed Forces are made up of 6 branches: Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, Air Force, and most recently, Space Force. Each branch of the military has a unique directive within the overall mission of U.S. security and peace. And since this is Thru History, I figure we should explore the honored history and traditions of each branch of our armed forces. Let's start with the Army, the oldest branch of the U.S. military, by traveling to the banks of the Hudson River in Newburgh, New York. When the American Revolution started at the battles of Lexington and Concord in April of 1775, the colonists didn't have an army. At that point in history, each of the 13 states relied on their own militias, made up of part-time civilian soldiers. But on June 14, 1775, the Second Continental Congress unified the colonial militias to fight the British forces by establishing the Continental Army. One day later, Congress unanimously elected General George Washington as Commander-in-Chief. Almost immediately, the Continental Army absorbed 22,000 militia troops around Boston and 5,000 militia troops around New York City. It also established the first 10 companies of Continental Riflemen from Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia, which became known as the 1st Continental Regiment. George Washington and the new Continental Army had their first major victory when they forced the British out of Boston in 1776. But later that year, they had their first major defeats when they lost to New York City. After crossing the Delaware River in the cold of winter, General Washington and his army returned to defeat the British at Trenton and Princeton, thus retaking New Jersey and restoring morale. They continued with significant victories at Saratoga in 1777 and Yorktown in 1781. During this period, George Washington had a special gift for holding his new army together, leading his officers, and encouraging his troops. He was also known for his detailed attention to supplies, logistics, and training, which would prove crucial for long-term success against the professional British forces. This is Washington's headquarters, State Historic Site in Newburgh, New York. Acquired and opened by the state of New York in 1850, this is the first publicly owned and operated historic site in the United States. Known as the Hasbrouck House, this national landmark is restored to reflect George Washington's time here with his wife, Martha. From April of 1782 to August of 1783, George Washington made his headquarters in this fieldstone farmhouse just above the Hudson River. It was the longest he stayed at any location during the 8.5 years of the Revolutionary War. During his time here, General Washington made some of his most important contributions to shaping the American Army and the American Republic that would soon follow. Among other achievements, it's here at the Hasbrouck House where George Washington rejected the idea of an American monarchy, ended a conspiracy where some in the military tried to take control of the new government, created the Badge of Military Merit, which later became known as the Purple Heart, awarded to service members killed or wounded in action, and wrote an historic letter to all the state governors where he outlined the key principles necessary to successfully establish a new republic. Many scholars view this letter as a cornerstone of what would become the U.S. Constitution. This is George Washington's office here at the Hasbrouck House. This furniture, I'm told, is of the period, some 240 plus years old. In fact, this is the very chair and desk used by George Washington during this critical period in American history. It's also here at the Hasbrouck House where General George Washington, the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, formally delivered his proclamation for the cessation of hostilities on April 18, 1783, effectively ending the Revolutionary War, congratulating his troops, and giving thanks to God. Just south of Washington's headquarters in Newburgh, New York, is another important military site dating back to the Revolutionary era. Let's drive about 13 miles down the Hudson River to check it out. This is West Point. Its role in our nation's history dates back to the Revolutionary War, when both sides realized the strategic importance of this high plateau on the west bank of the Hudson River. In fact, General George Washington considered West Point to be the most important strategic position in America. Continental soldiers first occupied this key spot on January 27, 1778. After the harsh winter froze the Hudson and allowed a Connecticut militia unit to cross the river and set up camp here. Thereafter, the Continental Army fortified the site with forts, walls, and cannon batteries to defend against British ships traveling the Hudson River. The Continental Army considered the British Navy such a threat that they built a huge iron chain to block this span of river between West Point and Constitution Island over there. Known as the Great Hudson River Chain, it had 2-foot links stretching the length of 6 football fields. Incredibly, the obstacle worked, and the British never even attempted to run the river here at West Point. After the war, the Great Chain was melted down for iron, but a small segment is still on display here at the Academy. During some of the Revolutionary War, West Point was known as Fort Arnold, after its commander at the time, Benedict Arnold. But after his treasonous activities were uncovered in 1780, Arnold fled to the British side, and West Point was renamed Fort Clinton. Though the fort was used for training cadets in engineering, starting as early as 1794, it wasn't until 1802 that President Thomas Jefferson officially established the United States Military Academy here at West Point. It was the first military school in our new nation. In 1812, 10 years after establishing the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, the growing threat of another war with Great Britain resulted in congressional action to expand the Academy's facilities and increase the number of men trained and educated here. Then, beginning in 1817, the Academy was expanded once again, and the school became one of the nation's finest sources of civil engineers. Today, the U.S. Military Academy is under the general direction of the Department of the U.S. Army. Now, to dig a little bit deeper into the military history and traditions here at West Point, I'm joined by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Siri. Hi, Dave Stotts.
Dave Siri.
Yeah.
Please call me Dave.
Okay, I will. So give us a little bit of an idea of where we're standing and what West Point's all about.
Well, right now, we're on the plain. The plain is the parade field for West Point, and we're in front of the barracks. And over here, you can see Eisenhower Barracks, Washington Hall, which has a lot of administrative and academic areas in there, as well as the mess hall in the first couple of floors. And then over here is MacArthur Hall. And you can see, if you look over there, you can see Eisenhower's statue next to Eisenhower Barracks. Beyond that is the library. The library is brand new. General Patton is standing over there as well. And then over here, around the corner, you can barely see MacArthur's statue right next to the superintendent's house, the commandant's house, and the dean's house. You'll see the flagpole, which is a mast from the USS Maine, which was lost in Havana Harbor during the Spanish-American War. And President or General Grant is the statue at the base over there.
Now, I'm seeing a lot of these West Point cadets run in this 100-degree heat today, and it's really impressive. There's some tough young men and women. When they see these statues, is the idea for them to be impressed with the fact that they're here as part of the latest in a long tradition of honor and duty and sacrifice?
I think so, yes. Yeah. I teach in the history department, and one of the things we say is much of the history we teach was made by the people we taught.
Wow.
Here we are inside the Cadet Chapel. This chapel was built in 1910. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention, earlier you were talking about Thomas Jefferson wanting a school for engineers,
right.
And that's exactly right. It was interesting because when Jefferson founded the academy, he opposed large standing armies. He didn't want a large standing army, he preferred the militia. But what he did want was school-trained engineers, because as he bought the Louisiana Purchase and hoped to expand the country westward, he wanted school-trained engineers to build bridges, survey roads, and do all those things that a young nation needed. And the best place to get those engineers was at a military academy, and that's why he did it.
Yeah. So his initial goal wasn't to, as you say, expand it into a superpower military. He wanted infrastructure and bridges and such for westward expansion.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Here we are up at Redoubt 4. A redoubt is a small fortification. Up in the hills here around West Point, there are 4 redoubts. This is redoubt number 4. This was the last defense if the British were to come around from behind West Point and try to get up onto the fortification from the rear. You can see the river over here and how it continues, and then it curves back this way before heading north to Newburgh. The curve of the river is why West Point is here. Early in the American Revolution, Washington knew that West Point, this area, was key to the continent because of the Hudson River. If the British could use the Hudson River as a high-speed avenue of approach, they could isolate the colonies over in Massachusetts, isolate the area they thought was causing all the problems. And if they could isolate it, hopefully they could defeat the rebellion. Washington knew he had to cut this line of communication, this high-speed avenue of approach, and they wanted to find some place on the river where they could stop British ships. And this was perfect. The river narrowed, which was nice. The currents and the winds are very tricky going around this S-curve, and so it would hinder British ships. And then that was the spot down there. If you can see down on the river, you see a little white boathouse on Constitution Island across there?
Yeah, yep.
That, just to the left of that, is where they anchored the Great Chain from Chain Cove on this side across the river when they finally put the Great Chain in. When they did that, it created an obstacle. The chain was floating on rafts of logs, and in front of it was a log boom. The boom was designed to slow down the British ships before they got to the actual chain. But the chain is just an obstacle. And one of the things we learn in the military is an obstacle is not an obstacle unless it's overwatched by fire, meaning unless you have somebody with guns pointed at it, you can get around, you can go over, you can go under, you can break an obstacle. So the real defense were all the batteries of artillery that were facing the river down there. And that was what was going to stop the British. Right here, this is the iconic view of Trophy Point. You can see the S-curve as the river comes around here.
Right around here, yeah.
You can see the white house there and the white boathouse, which is where the chain would have anchored.
One end of the chain would be connected to where that white boathouse is, and so it would connect over to this side, down that slope on the shore. Okay.
Down that slope. And one of the important things to remember is everything at West Point focuses on the river. Everything. The chain is the first line of defense. The chain is guarded by batteries. There were at least 3 different batteries on that side, and then down over here is a trail called Flirtation Walk these days, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4 batteries along that trail protecting the chain. Then you get up to Fort Clinton or Fort Arnold, as you said earlier, and then that protected the batteries that were protecting the chain. Up the hill is Fort Putnam, which protects Fort Arnold, which protects the batteries that protect the chain. Up on the mountaintop are the redoubts that protect Putnam, that protect Arnold, that protect the batteries protecting the chain.
All right,
everything focuses.
I'm getting a little dizzy, but the layers of protection are pretty impressive. Wow, what an amazing place. Well, from one history-loving Dave to another, I'm really grateful for the time you spent with us today. You live and work in an amazing place. I think one of the most amazing places in America, if not the most amazing place. So thank you. Really appreciate your expertise and your time.
It was my pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
$99, $100, give or take. I could hack it at West Point. Today, the U.S. Army is made up of more than 700,000 soldiers, including active duty and Army Reserve personnel. I pray that God will continue to empower and protect these great men and women as we roll ahead into a new era of challenges at home and abroad. Now, to explore the next branch of the U.S. military, the Navy, let's return to New York. About 60 miles south of West Point, down the Hudson River, is the epic Manhattan Island. If we're going to honor the history of the U.S. Navy, I think it's time to go to sea. Or river, as the case may be. Details. Captain, permission to come aboard.
Welcome aboard.
Ah, all right. Hi. All right. Ships ahoy! The U.S. Navy recognizes October 13, 1775 as the date of its formation. This is when George Washington encouraged Congress to officially create a continental navy and purchase 2 boats for missions against British merchant ships, bringing arms and supplies to the colonies. Then, 2 months later, Congress went on to authorize the construction of 13 warships armed with cannons. After the Revolutionary War ended, the Continental Navy was shut down and the remaining ships were sold off. The upstart United States was struggling financially, and Congress didn't see the need to maintain a naval force. The problem was that American merchant shipping had been protected by the British Navy. So, after the War for Independence, the United States no longer had any protection for its ships from the world's pirates. This was a big issue for merchant vessels operating in the Atlantic Ocean and Mediterranean Sea. Since the Barbary states of North Africa, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli made a big business out of capturing ships and holding them for ransom. If sponsoring countries didn't pay up, ships were destroyed, crews were killed, and supplies were cut off. It's a beautiful day. I do love New York.
The issue came to a head in 1793 when Barbary pirates captured 11 American merchant ships and more than 100 sailors. This forced a big ransom payment by the United States. In response, Congress approved the Naval Act of 1794, which authorized the construction of 6 armed frigates. 3 of those ships, the USS United States, USS Constellation, and USS Constitution, were completed and launched 3 years later to help deal with the growing crisis. The Constitution, probably the most famous of the ships, was nicknamed Old Ironsides and can still be visited today in Boston Harbor.
In 1801, Tripoli began to increase its piracy campaigns. This time, the United States was ready. President Thomas Jefferson ordered U.S. Navy vessels to the Mediterranean Sea, and the First Barbary War began. After a couple of years of small sea battles, the Navy started hitting the pirate harbors along the North African coast. Then, in April of 1805, the U.S. captured the port city of Derna in a daring raid, which also included U.S. expeditionary forces known as the Marines. Supported by the heavy guns of the USS Argus, USS Hornet, and USS Nautilus, American forces captured Derna, deposed the leader of Tripoli, and won the First Barbary War. In 1815, Algiers tried its hand at increasing piracy attacks, and the Second Barbary War broke out. This time, the U.S. Navy quickly defeated the Algerian fleet and secured a lasting end to the Barbary practice of piracy, tribute, and ransom on the high seas. In turn, this freed up important merchant shipping for the United States as it rolled forward into the 19th century.
Between 1880 and 1907, a new era of modern naval warfare was launched. This included battleships, frigates, and a number of other surface vessels. President Theodore Roosevelt even ordered the U.S. Navy on a 14-month world tour to demonstrate the awesome capability of the new U.S. Navy. Although the Navy didn't see much action in World War I, it came into its own during World War II and in the period since then.
This is the Intrepid, an Essex-class aircraft carrier built during World War II. Commissioned in August of 1943, the Intrepid participated in several campaigns in the Pacific. After World War II, the ship was converted into an attack carrier and then an anti-submarine carrier, participating in the Vietnam War. Now, the USS Intrepid was decommissioned in 1974. About 8 years later, the ship became the centerpiece of the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum here in New York City. Hey, Captain, can we dock here for a bit? Arg! So I finally made it aboard Intrepid, and I've had the pleasure of meeting a Navy veteran, Mr. John Olivera. John's going to give us a brief tour of the Intrepid. There's probably no such thing as a brief tour.
You're right.
The Intrepid is huge. But thanks for spending a few moments with us. Now, you served on the USS Intrepid, is that
Correct.
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, tell us a little bit about what you did and maybe give us some of the highlights of this vessel we're on.
Well, I guess when I first came on board, it was a whole new world to me. It was, I was totally lost, had no idea, so you rely on naturally all your shipmates have to show you what to do, how to do it. My two favorite words were pay attention. So that's what I always
sorry, what
did.
was that?
Pay attention.
Oh, okay.
I always
Spaced
paid
out for a
attention,
moment
yeah.
there. So when I see the footage of planes coming in or taking off, I see lots of men running around on deck. Well, you were one of those guys.
I was, yes.
What did you do exactly?
Well, I started as a blue shirt, they call us, what we did with a plane handler. And so what you did was you move the aircraft about, usually by hand, but a lot of times you could be using a tow truck or a tow bar. Yeah, it might be 2 or 3 guys get on a tow bar and you pull the plane so you can back it in and park it properly so you get ready for the next phase of operation that the plane was going to be on.
You probably didn't need much help, though. You could probably move a plane by yourself. I mean,
Well, maybe back then, yeah. I wouldn't try that today. Mostly my area was up front. I was working up the forward guy. We have to spot all the aircraft up forward for recovery. So all the aircraft that were in the air had to be recovered. And once they were all recovered back there, then we spot them again and get ready for the next launch. So, for example, all the aircraft that are up here now would all be in the back of their ship.
Okay.
And we had two launching sites. We had the starboard catapult and we had the port catapult. So those would be, and they go alternately. And it takes about 2 seconds to get 100 and something miles an hour.
Wow.
They'd be in the air. This would go on day and night, day and night. And as soon as they were all launched, then we'd bring all the aircraft that were back there, we'd bring them all up forward. We'd spot them or park them up in this area, so now we can get ready for the recovery. And then all the aircraft that are in the air would then be recovered in the back. There's elevator 1 would be right around this section that we're standing on. And I actually operated that elevator. Today it's the ceiling for the auditorium in the Intrepid.
Okay.
But it was elevator 1, and it would take the planes up and down from the flight deck. Elevator 2 would be back further to the port side over there.
So for those who don't know, the aircraft would be stored underneath the flight deck.
Correct.
And when it was time to take off, they would come up via the elevator that you described.
Or they'd be sent down for repairs. They might be going down for repairs. All the repair work basically was done on the hangar deck. So up here would be, this is flight, we're getting ready for flight operations.
And this is kind of where you spent most of your time.
Most of the time right up here, yep.
Wow.
This would be the captain's chair right here. This is where he would sit.
Welcome to the captain's bridge. All right, John tells us this is the captain's chair.
Right, nobody else sits here.
Yeah? Where's the steering wheel?
Well, we're going to go inside and do that. Over here, that's not HBO. He's monitoring the flight deck and everything that's going on out here. So he's got the whole world on that. And now we're entering the captain's bridge.
Okay, so welcome to the Captain's Bridge, USS Intrepid. This is where the general operation and navigation takes place when the vessel's at sea. Minimum of 10 people. You could have 12 battle stations. You could have 14 up to 16, whatever is required. Watch stations are 4-hour watches. You get rotated around those 4 hours. And some of the jobs and positions that you'll find is, first and foremost, the helm, the person that steers the ship.
Kind of an important job.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Now, while you control the steering from here, you do not control the speed of the vessel. That takes place in the engine room. However, you have this piece of equipment. This is an engine order telegraph. So you're telegraphing an engine order to the engine room.
The helmsman here, he might be 18 or 19 years old, that's it.
The helmsman is 18 or 19, despite the fact that it's one of the most important jobs. Would you ever catch him kind of leaning on it like this and kind
I
of
don't
hanging
think
with
so.
the guys?
No.
All right.
Here's where the captain's quarters would be when the ship's at sea.
Something tells me he's not getting a full 8 hours every night.
Yeah.
All right, this looks like an important room, John.
Yeah, this is a chart house. This is where they're going to get all the directions that you're going to go in. The captain will come in here and he'll go over everything with everybody. They'll get the directions. They'll go out and give it to the crew up forward, and the helmsman and so forth, and then off they go.
Listen, John, I really appreciate this tour. Thanks so much for this tour. Thanks for your service. Happy Veterans Day to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank all you guys. Thank you so much.
Gonna take you right into the Davy zone. I feel the need for some hand sanitizer. Gross.
American ships like the USS Intrepid served valiantly during World War II and were responsible for many victories at sea. The U.S. Navy went on to run large amphibious landings during the Korean War, fight with valor during the Vietnam War, conduct blockade operations during the Cuban Missile Crisis of the Cold War, and support our armed forces in every major armed conflict since.
Today, the U.S. Navy is the largest, most advanced ocean-going armed force on the planet. It leads the world in technology, including the fields of propulsion, surveillance, and weaponry. The modern Navy is a beacon of strength and resolve on the high seas, with a 21st century mission of maintaining security and deterrence through a sustained forward presence throughout the globe. The size and influence of our Navy around the world continues to amaze me. I pray that our country continues to fully support the far-reaching mission of these awesome men and women. To honor our next branch of the U.S. military, the Coast Guard, let's return to New York, and once again, let's go to sea. This time, I'm taking things up a notch and jumping aboard a 500 horsepower Defender-class tactical boat previously used by the U.S. Coast Guard. Come on, let's see what this baby can do. Punch it, Chewie! The Coast Guard was initially known as the Revenue Cutter Service, one of the oldest organizations in our federal government. It was established on August 4th, 1790, when President George Washington signed the Tariff Act, authorizing the construction of 10 armed vessels, known as cutters, to enforce trade laws and prevent smuggling. Until Congress established the Navy Department 8 years later, in 1798, the Coast Guard served as the nation's only armed force on the water.
In 1915, the Revenue Cutter Service merged with the U.S. Lifesaving Service and was officially renamed the Coast Guard. It became the only U.S. armed service dedicated to saving life at sea and enforcing the nation's maritime laws. In 1939, the Coast Guard absorbed the Lighthouse Service, and in 1946, all merchant marine licensing and vessel safety responsibilities. The Coast Guard adopted its trademark orange and blue racing stripe design in 1967.
Today, the Coast Guard is both a federal law enforcement agency and a military force, and therefore is a faithful protector of the United States in peacetime and war. In times of war, or at the direction of the president, the Coast Guard serves under the Department of the Navy, defending the nation against foreign threats and terrorism. In times of peace, the Coast Guard operates as part of the Department of Homeland Security, enforcing the nation's laws at sea, protecting the marine environment, guarding the nation's vast coastline and ports, and performing vital life-saving missions. One of the greatest rescue operations in the history of the Coast Guard happened on the night of February 18th, 1952, off the coast of New England. This rescue is the stuff of books and a major motion picture.
To use the well-known writing cliche, it was literally a dark and stormy night. On that night, the sea was producing 70-foot waves. These waves were so strong that they broke the SS Pendleton, a 504-foot oil tanker, into two pieces. The forward half of the mighty ship was lost, taking the lives of Captain John Fitzgerald and 7 others. The stern, or rear half of the ship, remained floating. 33 men had no hope of survival without the Coast Guard attempting the near impossible rescue. The only available rescue craft, Coast Guard motor lifeboat CG-36500, was a small 36-foot open boat captained by coxswain Bernard Weber and a crew of just 3 other men: Engineman 3rd Class Andrew Fitzgerald, Seaman Irvin Mask, and Seaman Richard Livesey. The boat had a rated capacity for just 16 people to try and rescue the 33 SS Pendleton survivors.
The path to rescue meant going through the notoriously difficult Chatham sandbar, which was dangerous on a good day. The crew got off to a rough start, with a large wave shattering the windshield, leaving them exposed to the freezing cold. The wave also ripped off the ship's compass, the only navigational aid on board. To calm their nerves and to help them stay focused on the task at hand, the 4 crew sang the hymn, Rock of Ages, which ends with, "And while I draw my final breath, I will rest upon your grace. And when I close my eyes in death, I will wake to see your face."
Amazingly, they were able to locate the shattered remains of the tanker. Using a rope ladder, 32 out of the 33 men on board were successfully rescued onto the tiny Coast Guard boat. In the pitching waters, one member of the Pendleton crew died tragically when he was crushed in the rescue attempt. For extreme and heroic daring, all 4 crew members received the Coast Guard's highest honor, the Gold Life-Saving Medal. The small Coast Guard rescue boat has been preserved in a Massachusetts museum.
Today, there are over 56,000 members of the U.S. Coast Guard, operating a multi-mission fleet of approximately 2,000 crafts. This includes about 240 of their famous cutters and 200 fixed and rotary wing aircraft. The Coast Guard protects and defends more than 100,000 miles of U.S. coastland and inland waterways. The service also patrols an exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, covering 4.5 million square miles, stretching from north of the Arctic Circle to south of the equator, and from Puerto Rico to Guam. In addition to its role as a branch of the armed services, the Coast Guard is a first responder and a humanitarian service that provides aid to people in distress or impacted by disasters. The Coast Guard's motto is Semper Paratus, always ready. Wow. The unsung heroes of the U.S. Coast Guard. What an incredible legacy of service here and around the world. Next up, the United States Marines.
The history of the U.S. Marine Corps goes all the way back to the beginning of the United States. First established as the Continental Marines in 1775 to conduct ship-to-ship fighting during the American Revolution, the Marines have served in almost every U.S. conflict since. For nearly 2.5 centuries, the Marines have developed a worldwide reputation in amphibious warfare and earned widespread respect for rapid response and fierce fighting. I felt the best way to honor the warrior spirit of the United States Marines was to revisit my favorite monument in the Washington, D.C. area, the U.S. Marine Corps War Memorial.
This is one of my favorite memorials, inspired by an iconic 1945 photograph of 6 Marines raising the U.S. flag on the island of Iwo Jima during World War II. It's super impressive with these 32-foot bronze figures raising a 60-foot bronze flagpole. on a memorial that rises 78 feet overall. The flag flies 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, by presidential proclamation.
Here's some of the history. The tiny island of Iwo Jima lies 660 miles south of Tokyo, Japan. Mount Suribachi, an extinct volcano that forms the southern end of the island, rises 550 feet to dominate the ocean around it. U.S. troops had recaptured most of the other islands in the Pacific Ocean that the Japanese took in 1941 and 1942. By 1945, Iwo Jima had become a primary objective in the American strategy to bring the War of the Pacific to an end. On the morning of February 19, 1945, the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions invaded Iwo Jima. The 28th Regiment of the 5th Division was ordered to capture Mount Suribachi. They reached the base of the mountain on the afternoon of February 21st, and by nightfall the next day had almost surrounded it. On the morning of February 23rd, Marines of Company E, 2nd Battalion started the treacherous climb to the top. At about 10:30 a.m., men all over the island cheered when they saw a small American flag flying atop Mount Suribachi. That afternoon, when the mountain was clear of enemy resistance, a second, larger flag was raised in the same location. Joe Rosenthal of the Associated Press caught the second flag raising in a famous photograph that won a Pulitzer Prize and later became the model for the Iwo Jima Memorial. Despite the capture of Mount Suribachi, the Battle of Iwo Jima would rage on for another month. It was some of the fiercest and bloodiest fighting in the Pacific Theater, with 6,821 U.S. troops killed. The statue of 6 Marines, 3 of which later died in the battle, would become a fitting tribute to the courage and resolve of U.S. Marines everywhere. Once the statue was completed in plaster, it was carefully disassembled and trucked to Brooklyn, New York for casting in bronze. The casting process, which required the work of expert craftsmen, took nearly 3 years. After the parts were cast, cleaned, and treated, they were reassembled into approximately a dozen pieces, the largest weighing more than 20 tons, and trucked back to Virginia. Here, they were bolted and welded together on this granite base. President Dwight D. Eisenhower dedicated the memorial on November 10, 1954, the 179th anniversary of the United States Marine Corps.
The Iwo Jima Memorial is truly inspiring, containing the location and date of every major Marine Corps action up to the present time. It also contains some powerful inscriptions that communicate the dedication and sacrifice of the United States Marines throughout American history. These are my favorites. Uncommon valor was a common virtue, and Semper Fidelis, the Marine Corps' Latin motto, which means always faithful. The U.S. Marine Corps, the few, the proud indeed. Such a legacy of true, courageous warriors that have dutifully served our country for generations. Now let's take things skyward and honor the United States Air Force.
The United States Air Force became a separate military branch after World War II with the passage of the National Security Act of 1947. The act established the U.S. Department of Defense, initially comprised of the Army, Navy, Marines, and newly created Air Force. Prior to 1947, military aviation had a proud history, divided among the Army for land-based operations and the Navy and Marine Corps for sea-based operations. By the 1950s and 60s, air power became a major pillar of America's national defense. To explore that time in aviation history, I'm going to Colorado Springs to visit with retired Colonel Lee Mazzarella of the United States Air Force.
Hello there. You must be Colonel Mazzarella.
Yes.
Dave Stotts.
Yes, sir, Dave.
Thanks so much for letting me come to your hangar here today. Okay, so I'm no detective, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is your airplane.
Yes, I own it with another fellow.
Okay, but your name is on the side here, right?
Yes, sir.
So what's Padrone? What's that all about?
Padrone in Italian means godfather.
I'm not gonna argue with you at all today whatsoever. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself. When did you get interested in aviation?
I think probably in grade school, I received a book that said, talked about how to fly. I read it and I said, I could do that.
So you're really living out your boyhood dreams even to this day, right?
I'm very fortunate, yes.
Never give up on those dreams, right?
I'm very fortunate, yes.
So Lee, you served in the Vietnam War.
Yes, sir.
And so tell me a little bit about the nature of your Air Force deployments in Vietnam.
Well, I had 2 deployments, 2 tours, one in F-4s and one in A-1s. That's a Sky Raider, which is a World War II propeller-driven aircraft.
Okay.
The first one was early in the war, and when we were still striking at North Vietnam and Hanoi. The second one was in '72, and we did rescue. We would go in and clear the area around a downed pilot, and then the helicopter would come in when it was safe, pick up the pilot, and rescue him. That was probably the most satisfying of my tours, because we were able to bring a fellow pilot home.
Now the A1s, those are the ones that had guns, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we had 4 20mm cannons. 2 cannons in each of the wings. Underneath the wings, we had 15 storage areas. So we would have what was called CBU, we would have a regular rocket pod, we'd have a marking rocket pod, we'd have a woolly phosphorus bomb, then there'd be a minigun, a 300-gallon tank underneath, 150-gallon, and then the other wing was the same. We could start our own war.
So you mentioned those rescue flights. Give
Yes.
us a little idea of what that looked like.
Someone would be shot down. They'd scramble us from alert, just like in the movies. They would give us coordinates. We didn't have GPS, we had a map. And we'd plot the map where we were and where we thought the rescue guy was, and we would just fly that line, time and distance. Then the A1s would strike around the survivor, because once the helicopter got into the hover, they would drop a penetrator on a big hoist. They'd hoist them into the helicopter, and then we'd leave.
Do you have an idea of how many sorties you actually went on while you were
Well,
serving there?
when I flew F-4s, I had 146, and in A1s, I've had 90 sorties.
So how many does that give us?
236.
236. That's really remarkable.
Well,
Amazing.
I was fortunate. In my F-4 squadron, we lost 8 aircraft. 2 guys in each aircraft, that's 16 guys. In my A1 squadron, we had 9 shot down, but we rescued all but 1 pilot. 1 pilot was, unfortunately, took a hit in the cockpit, and the plane exploded. This is called an RV, and it is the most popular kit airplane ever designed. It has a 160 horsepower engine. It's pretty fast, and it's fully aerobatic.
And what does that mean?
If you want to go up, I'm going to take you through a 1G roll.
Do you have barf bags inside the plane?
I do.
Okay.
But in all my experience of taking people for rides, I've never had one person become sick.
Well, now it's for sure going to happen. So Lee, noticing the word experimental.
Yes, sir.
Should I be concerned about that in any way? You know, I need a flight attendant to do the little demonstration. I'm Frenchy?
Oh.
I don't know if I want to be Frenchy. It's really sunny, Lee. Should I have a hat?
Yes, have a
Hey,
hat.
somebody throw me a hat.
Great.
Really? That was amazing.
Never made anybody sick, so.
Well, I'm not gonna break your winning streak today, I hope. Pardon me. Yeah, so since this is drive-through history,
Yes.
not fly-through history, you wanna take it for a spin?
You bet.
Let me feel 1G. Come on. U.S. air superiority has been the key to U.S. military success since World War II. Thanks to all our members of the United States Air Force for controlling the skies. Indeed, military control of the airspace has been an increasing challenge in recent years, since the world now competes in the region beyond our skies, outside our atmosphere. Over the last few decades, the launch, command, and control of satellites has become crucial to our military operations and national defense. Satellites provide essential support to our military forces, secure communications, weather and navigational data, and threat warnings. Due to this 21st century reality, we just got a new branch of the U.S. military, Space Force. The U.S. Space Force was approved as the latest branch in the American Armed Forces in December of 2019. Since then, they have been recruiting a team of military and civilian personnel to enhance the competitive edge of our Department of Defense in space. I mean, come on. When I saw civilian and space in the same sentence on their website, I knew my time had finally come. Since the 1980s, I've been honing my skills. Space Invaders, Asteroids, Galaga, countless tokens spent with my brother at the old video arcade growing up in Canton, Ohio. We also wore out our VHS of The Last Starfighter, a movie about a teenage kid who conquers a video game, only to find out that the game was a test planted there to help find and recruit starfighters from Earth to help defend another galaxy from an alien invasion. Later, when I found out the movie was not a documentary, I was sorely disappointed. Until now. In all seriousness, I couldn't be more excited for our latest military branch, the U.S. Space Force, and the crucial role it will play in our national defense going forward. Live long and prosper. May the Force be with you to infinity and beyond. Nano, nano. While Veterans Day focuses on those who have previously served in our military, many of us treat the holiday a bit more inclusively. In addition to our past service members, there are also active duty soldiers and sailors, our Reserve and National Guard forces, and of course, the millions of family members who have served our country by supporting their military spouses, parents, and children over the years. To all of you, thank you for your service. You know, I shudder to think about a United States of America without its military, diligently standing guard. Human nature is fallen. Bad actors seek power, and history tends to repeat itself. Therefore, an American policy of peace through strength should be as true today as it's ever been. We need to maintain our national willingness to engage evil when it rears its ugly head. We need to cherish our warrior class, those willing to take the fight overseas to defend our liberty at home. And we need to stand resolved in our military alliances with other nations that still promote the causes of freedom, democracy, and morality around the world. On this Veterans Day in America, I celebrate our nation's military history and sincerely honor the service and sacrifice of our military members and their families. On behalf of myself and the Drive Thru History team, thank you again for your service.